"Mom, hurry. I can't hold it anymore," I whispered, my voice trembling with urgency. My heart raced in my chest as I felt the weight of the moment press down on me. I knew this was wrong. Every part of me screamed to stop, to pull away from the edge we were teetering on. But the way she looked at me, the way she was moving so slowly, made it feel like time was slipping through my fingers. Was it too late to turn back? Would we regret what was about to happen? Or was this just the beginning of something we couldn't escape? My name is Noah and I'm 20 years old. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, nestled between tree-lined streets and the occasional patch of green. My dad, Robert, married my stepmom Helena about 2 years ago. She's always been kind to me though from the start. I knew there was a certain tension in the air, something that neither of us dared to address. Growing up, I was always the type to keep to myself. I've never been the center of attention, nor did I crave it. But things were different when Helena came into our lives. At first, it was just small gestures. The way she smiled when she greeted me, the way her eyes lingered just a moment too long as we passed each other in the hallway. I could tell she was trying to make an effort to be kind, but there was something else there, something unspoken that she tried to hide behind her politeness. At first, it didn't bother me. She was my dad's wife after all, and who was I to complicate things? But as time went on, I started noticing things that felt out of place. The way her gaze would flicker nervously whenever I came home late from school, or the way her laugh seemed a little too loud when I joined the family for dinner. These were small things easy to ignore, or so I thought. It wasn't until one summer evening that things changed. It was a typical hot, humid evening, the kind where the air feels thick and heavy. My dad was out on a business trip and it was just Helena and me at home. I had spent most of the afternoon lounging on the couch, flipping through old magazines, the warm glow of the setting sun casting long shadows through the living room. Helena had been quiet that evening too. She was in the kitchen humming softly to herself as she prepared dinner, a soft, familiar sound. I'd always admired how graceful she was, her movements fluid and natural, like a dancer unaware of her own beauty. But that night was different. I don't know what made me feel this way, but as I looked at her, I couldn't help but notice how alone she seemed. I'd seen her many times before, of course, but something about the way she stood there chopping vegetables, with her soft blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, suddenly caught my attention. It was almost as if she had become someone I had never truly noticed until that moment. I got up from the couch, stretched lazily, and walked into the kitchen, unsure of what I wanted to say or even if I wanted to say anything at all. But as I neared, I saw her glance up, her blue eyes meeting mine. The way she looked at me then was different. There was a quiet intensity there, something more than just the casual, friendly glance we'd shared countless times before. It was personal. I felt my heart rate quicken, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "Is everything okay?" I asked, the words falling from my lips before I could stop them. Helena blinked, her expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded. "Yeah, I'm just tired, I guess. It's been a long day." She turned back to her task, but I could still feel her eyes on me. My gaze lingered on her as she chopped the vegetables, the knife slicing through them with a soft rhythm. It was hard to look away. "Well, if you need help, just let me know," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I wasn't sure why I had said it. It wasn't like me to be so forward, but the tension in the room seemed to pull something out of me, some part of me that had been buried beneath the surface for years. She smiled, but it was tight, as though she didn't quite know how to respond. "Thanks, Noah. That's sweet of you." I nodded and turned to leave, but before I could, she spoke again, her voice softer now. "Actually, if you want, you could help me with something. The sink's been acting up and I think the pipes are clogged. You've always been good with that kind of thing, right?" I froze. The sudden shift in tone made my stomach tighten. Helena never asked me for help with anything more than simple tasks, and the way she had said it, so earnestly, yet almost too casually, caught me off guard. But before I could say anything, I found myself nodding, agreeing to help her with something that felt strangely intimate. "Sure, I can take a look," I said, my voice thick with hesitation. But I followed her to the small bathroom off the kitchen where the sink was located. As I crouched down to inspect the pipes beneath the sink, I could feel Helena's presence behind me. Her footsteps were soft, but each one seemed to echo in my mind, making my heart beat faster. I tugged at the pipes, trying to dislodge whatever was causing the blockage, but my thoughts kept drifting back to her. I could feel her standing behind me, watching me. The air between us was heavy, charged, and I couldn't escape the sense that something had shifted. As I twisted the wrench, trying to focus, I suddenly felt her hand on my shoulder. "Do you need help?" she asked, her voice low and surprisingly tender. Her touch lingered there for a moment, just enough to send a ripple through my body. I straightened up, and for the first time our eyes locked. I could see the vulnerability in her gaze, something I had never seen before. She looked unsure, almost fragile. I could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating, and I had to resist the urge to reach out to her. "No, I think I've got it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But inside, my mind was racing. What was happening between us? Why was I suddenly so aware of her? For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched on, heavy and thick, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. There was only the sound of our breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Then, without warning, she stepped closer, her hand still on my shoulder. "Noah," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been thinking about you, about us." Her words sent a jolt through me, and I stiffened, unsure of how to respond. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, each beat louder than the last. What was she saying? What was I feeling? "I don't know if this is right," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can't ignore it anymore." And with that, everything changed. I could hardly believe what I had just heard. My heart raced as I tried to process her words. "I've been thinking about you, about us." The words echoed in my mind over and over again, each repetition sending a wave of confusion and unexpected longing through me. Helena's hand was still on my shoulder, her fingers warm against my skin, and for a moment I didn't know whether I should pull away or lean into the feeling. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner, but it felt as though the world had stopped moving. Every inch of me was aware of her presence, and it felt like the walls around us were closing in, trapping us in a bubble of something neither of us knew how to navigate. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "What do you mean?" The words slipped out before I could think, a mix of curiosity and something else, something deeper that I wasn't ready to acknowledge. She hesitated, her eyes flickering to the floor before meeting mine again. She looked so vulnerable in that moment, like she was on the edge of saying something she knew she might regret. But despite the hesitation in her gaze, there was a quiet certainty in the way she held herself. It was almost as if she had been carrying this feeling for a long time and finally couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. "Noah," she whispered, stepping even closer, so close that I could feel her breath on my face. "There's something between us, something I can't explain, something that's been building ever since we met." She paused, her lips parting slightly as though searching for the right words. "I know this is wrong, but I can't stop thinking about you." Her confession hung in the air like a fragile thread, ready to snap at the slightest movement. My mind spun in a dozen directions, each thought more conflicting than the last. This was my stepmom, someone I had lived with for the last 2 years. She had always been kind to me, always treated me with respect. But this was something entirely different. This was a confession, an admission of something I hadn't even realized I had wanted, no needed, to. I swallowed hard, trying to process everything. "Helena," I murmured, my voice barely audible as I took a step back, the reality of what she was saying crashing down on me. "This isn't right. You're my stepmom." She closed her eyes for a brief moment, the weight of my words sinking in. But when she opened them again, there was a look in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. It was a mixture of desire, desperation, and something softer, something that made my chest tighten. "I know," she replied softly, her voice trembling, "but it doesn't change what I feel. It doesn't change what I want." Her words were a quiet plea, a vulnerability that I had never seen before. She started removing her top to attract me. While looking towards her skin, it was white, soft, and beautiful, and she was wearing bra inside, which is pushing her chest in upward direction, and it looked so good, and I can't take it anymore. The room seemed to shrink, the space between us growing smaller with each breath I took. I could feel her proximity, the way her body almost seemed to hum with tension. Every part of me screamed to step away to put distance between us, but there was another part of me, something deeper, that wanted to stay to see where this was going, to understand the emotions that had suddenly unraveled between us. The air around us felt thick, like it was charged with an unspoken energy, a magnetic pull that I couldn't escape. My hand instinctively reached for hers, but I stopped myself just before our fingers touched. The moment felt fragile, and any wrong move could shatter it. "Do you feel it too?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she was afraid of the answer, afraid of how much her own heart was laid bare. The way everything changes when we're alone like this. I nodded, the truth weighing heavily in my chest. I had never felt so conflicted. Part of me wanted to run from the emotions swirling inside me. Guilt, confusion, a fear of what this meant for our family. But there was another part, a darker, deeper part that couldn't deny what was happening between us. The pull, the chemistry, the way my body reacted to her every glance, every touch. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Time seemed to stretch as though the seconds were dragging on, each one more painful than the last. The room was silent except for the sound of our breathing, but it felt as though the tension was about to explode, the walls closing in around us. Finally, she stepped closer again, so close that I could feel the warmth radiating off her. Without saying another word, her hand reached up gently towards my pant, her fingers soft against my skin. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, unable to move, unable to breathe. She leaned in slowly, her face inches from mine, and for the first time, I could see the longing in her eyes, raw and unfiltered. "Noah," she breathed, her lips just a whisper away from mine. "I need you to know. I never meant for this to happen. But it's real. What I feel for you is real." And then, before I could say anything, before I could process the weight of her words, she kissed me. It wasn't the hurried, desperate kiss of someone acting on impulse. No, it was slow, deliberate, as if she had been waiting for this moment for far longer than either of us realized. Her lips were warm against mine, gentle at first, but as the kiss deepened, it became more intense, more consuming, as though everything else in the world had faded away. There was no past, no future, only the heat of the moment, the undeniable chemistry between us. I kissed her back, my body betraying my mind as the flood of emotions, desire, guilt, longing, rushed through me. My hands found their way to her waist, pulling her closer, and I felt her body against mine, soft and warm. She responded in kind, her hands threading through my hair, her body pressing closer to mine as though we were two pieces of a puzzle that had finally clicked into place. Every kiss, every touch felt like a revelation. It was wrong, it was forbidden, but in that moment I couldn't bring myself to care. All I could focus on was the way her lips tasted, the way her body moved against mine, the way everything else seemed to melt away when we were together. Her hands gently caressed the back of my neck, the way our bodies seemed to move in perfect sync. Time felt like it had stopped entirely, and nothing else mattered but the feeling of her in my arms. The kiss deepened further and my mind swirled in confusion. My stepmom, my dad's wife. This was not something that should be happening. But the way she kissed me, the way she held me made it impossible to think straight. For a long moment, we lost ourselves in the kiss, our breaths coming in shallow gasps. When we finally pulled away, we both looked at each other, breathless and wide-eyed, as if we were trying to process what had just happened. "I don't know what to say," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. This is wrong." Helena's eyes softened and she took a step back, giving me some space. "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her own conflicted emotions. "I never meant for this to happen. I don't know what to do, but I can't deny what's between us." I stood there unsure of what to do. My body was still alive with the sensation of her touch, the memory of her kiss, but my mind was a whirlwind of guilt and confusion. "But we can't." "I know," she interrupted gently, her voice full of regret. "I don't know what this is either, Noah. I don't know how we got here, but I can't pretend it didn't happen." I looked at her, searching her face for answers that I knew she didn't have. The room felt suffocating again, the air heavy with unspoken words. Finally I spoke, my voice shaking with the uncertainty that I couldn't hide. What happens now? Helena paused, her gaze flickering down to the floor before meeting mine again. I don't know. We'll have to figure this out, Noah. But I want you to know that I care about you. More than I should, but I do. Her words were raw, vulnerable, and the honesty in her voice was undeniable. The guilt that weighed on me was suffocating, but I couldn't ignore the pull I felt towards her. The connection that had formed between us in a way that was too powerful to be denied. Maybe we can't go back to the way things were. I whispered, my throat tight. But I don't want to lose you, Helena. She stepped forward, her hand reaching out to gently touch my cheek. We won't lose each other, she promised softly, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. But we have to be careful. We have to be sure that what's happening between us is something we can handle. I nodded slowly, knowing that whatever happened next, it would be complicated. But in that moment I couldn't deny that there was something real between us, something that neither of us could pretend wasn't there. As the night went on, we didn't speak much more about what had happened. There were no clear answers, no easy solutions. But I couldn't stop thinking about her, about us. And I knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that neither of us could have anticipated. That as the night stretched on, the weight of everything hung heavily between us. I couldn't stop replaying the moment, the kiss, her touch, the way it felt as if the world had fallen away. But now, in the silence, reality started to creep back in. There was so much I didn't understand, so many layers of complication I couldn't ignore. Helena was my stepmom. The guilt was suffocating, but the feelings, those were undeniable. Helena, I started, but my words faltered. I wasn't sure what I even wanted to say. How do you explain something like this? How do you make sense of something that feels both impossible and inevitable at the same time? Helena's gaze met mine, and I saw the uncertainty mirrored in her eyes. She was just as lost in all of this as I was. Maybe more so. I know, she whispered, her voice filled with both sadness and yearning. I never wanted this, Noah, this wasn't part of the plan. But now that it's happened, I can't just pretend like it didn't. I can't pretend like you're not everything I never thought I'd need. Her words cut through me, deeper than I ever imagined possible. Everything she said was so raw, so real, and it only made everything worse, because I felt the same way. I felt the pull of something I wasn't sure I could fight anymore. You didn't mean for it to happen, I said, my voice shaky with emotion. But it did. And now, what do we do? Helena looked away, her lips pressed together as she struggled to find the words. I could see the conflict in her expression, the way she was torn between the love she had for my dad and the undeniable connection that had sparked between us. It wasn't just a simple attraction, it was something deeper, something that neither of us knew how to navigate. I don't know, Noah, she said quietly. I don't know what happens next, but I do know that I can't just pretend it was a mistake. I can't pretend like there's nothing between us. Her voice cracked, and I could see the tears threatening to form in her eyes. The vulnerability in her was a mirror of what I felt. I wanted to reach out to her, but I was afraid. Afraid of what it might mean. Afraid of what it could lead to. I don't want to hurt anyone, I admitted, my voice barely audible. I don't want to destroy our family. But I can't deny how I feel. And every time I try to stop thinking about you, it just doesn't work. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with tears that she hadn't yet let fall. I don't want to hurt anyone either. But what do we do when the person you're supposed to protect is the one you're falling for? The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything that had happened. It felt like we were standing on the edge of something too powerful to ignore, something we had to face head-on. But the more we talked, the more we realized that the line between right and wrong was no longer clear. It was tangled with emotions and desires, with longing and regret. There was no going back from this. We both knew that. I don't know what to say, I muttered, stepping back, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. I don't know what happens next, but I can't stop wanting you. Helena let out a breath, shaking her head. Neither can I. But we have to be careful. We can't just jump into something we might regret. We need to think about this, Noah. But even as she said that, I could see the way she looked at me, the way she wanted me. It was impossible to deny the pull between us, even as it terrified both of us. We spent the rest of the night in silence, each of us wrapped in our own thoughts. The distance between us was growing, not from a lack of closeness, but from the overwhelming weight of the situation. We were stuck in a moment neither of us knew how to navigate, but it was a moment we couldn't erase. When I finally went to bed, my mind refused to quiet. I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about her. Helena was my stepmom. This wasn't supposed to happen, but it had. And no matter how hard I tried to fight it, it was becoming harder and harder to ignore the fact that there was something real between us. The days that followed were filled with awkward silences and stolen glances. The unspoken tension lingered between us, heavy and oppressive, as we both tried to make sense of the mess we'd found ourselves in. But the connection was undeniable. It was like a spark that wouldn't go out. And every time I saw her, the feelings only deepened.